I got to get these uploaded so I can delete the old ones. All right. So today we're going to do table operations in GIS. This should be a fairly short talk here, but you're going to utilize some data, and this is the first thing that you're going to do is to join two tables. One of the tables you're going to join isn't a spatial table. ArcGIS can ingest things that aren't spatial tables. This moredata.dbf is another table in the data that you've been given, and you're going to join it based on a key. You're going to combine two tables, one from demographic.shape and the other one is from moredata.dbf. I don't have ArcGIS open, but I'm going to show you real quick. Oh, I thought I had that. Sound like it's raining for a second. All right, so this is a skill that's important in ArcGIS. So just for now, I'm going to add, and I'm not following the lab exactly, but I'll put it C L L6, C temp L6, C temp L6. So notice that I added all three of the layers there. And by default, they actually all show up here. I've got soils, demographics, and I've got more data. But it's really hard to see on this. What I'm trying to say is, if you were to zoom way in on this, you could see that there's a check mark by demographics, there's a check mark by soils, but there's no check mark by more data. The reason that there's no check mark by more data is that it doesn't have any spatial information. It doesn't have anything to show here. For now, I'm just going to get rid of soils because we're not actually using that at this point. I'm going to remove it, and I'm going to zoom to this layer so that it zooms just to that layer. So this is the demographic data we're going to be using, okay? And then this is the more data. Now, if you open this and you don't see more data, even though you add it, because sometimes you might have clicked on one of these buttons, it's the second view, list by source. If you have the first one, it says list by drawing order, it won't show up because drawing order, that's the default one, actually. If you list it by drawing order, it won't show up because it is not drawn. So it only shows up in the list by source. Now it's there, more data. I can right-click on it just like anything else and open the attribute table. And you can see it has this field called block group, and the demographics has a field called block group. So I've got the same data in both block group, or this one, block group right here. Now, one of the things that often gets people frustrated is that, let's say I got data from two different sources, and it has a common field, like state name, so I have a field called state name and another field called state name. But somebody, what they did was the state name is like Alaska in all caps, and the other one has Alaska in lowercase, or mixed case, with A being big and all that. So when I go to join them, it doesn't join, and that's frustrating. And it is a little bit frustrating. But the way you have to do to counteract that is to figure out how to get them looking the same in order to do a join, because they actually have to match perfectly to do a join. Now in this case, we've done that. That's It's a little easier when it's numbers, a combination of numbers, because there's not as much differences. But what if somebody had used dashes instead of points? You have to massage the data a little bit, and that's where the calculation and assignment comes in. All right, so I'm just going to show you how to do a basic join, which is what the lab does. But if I go to demographics and I right-click and say join, joins and relates, join. What that's going to do is allow me to choose a field that will be based on I'm choosing the key. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to choose block group. And then I'm going to choose more data is the layer I'm going to join to, or the table I'm going to join to. And then I need to choose the field in the table that I want to base the join on. Luckily, it's named the same thing. Okay? So I'm going to join based on this field into that field. Now, I thought I was going to cover this in the lecture, but I guess I didn't. Maybe I don't use those slides. But the book does talk a little bit about it. Here is, ArcGIS has this written in plain English. But this is the difference between an outer join and an inner join. So the outer join is only going to keep all the records, and an inner join means that we're only going to keep the matching records. In other words, there has to be a row in more data for every row in demographics, otherwise those rows get dropped out of demographics. So if I say keep all records, and I make this join, if there's no row in more data that corresponds with demographics, then there's just a bunch of emptiness in the table. There's going to be some columns that have data values in them. Because, let's say this had 25 values and this had 50 values. So when I do that join, there's no matching value. All right, so I can hit validate join. There's really no reason to do that, because when you hit OK, it'll tell you whether or not it worked. But you can also tell it that you want to index the field. For now, I'm going to say no. There's just so few data sets in there that it really matters. No. Okay, once I do that, you can say yes if you want to. It's not really going to hurt. It just takes a few extra seconds to calculate the index. Once I do that now, look at how the table for demographics has increased. It's gotten bigger. Okay? But now let's go down here and see. It doesn't look like there's any, it looks like there was a one-to-one relationship. In other words, there was just as many records, or there were fewer records and more data. But there's no emptiness. So if I selected that keep all records in the input table, and there was some where there wasn't a block group in the second table, then I would have seen some empty values. But these are the new attributes that came over from more data. So why would you want to do this? Well, now I have all this additional information that I can make a map of. I can make a map because this table is now being treated as though it's one table. So when I go in to change the symbology, I could make a map, for example, of the household percent growth. So these are the households that grew more than those. And that information wasn't contained in the original data set. So oftentimes census data happens like this. You get the spatial information along with a bunch of key coded values, and then the attribute information is in a totally different database, or totally different data table. You download separately and join them together. But it's not just census data that's like this. There's a lot of reasons to do joins. This is just one example of doing a join. So like, for example, I could do a calculation and assignment and then rejoin the data back in later. Okay, now at this point, one more thing before I turn you loose here. At this point, the table is just a virtual join. It only exists in this map document. So if I go to File, Save, and I reopen this map document later, the join will be there. Remember, map documents don't store any of the actual data. They only store references to the data. Okay? But it's going to recreate that join every time I open up ArcGIS. If I want to create a new data set where the data is already joined, I have to go like this. Right-click, export data like we've done before. Now, this data set that gets created, I could email that data set to a friend and it would already be joined. They don't have to even be my friend. I could email it to anybody, friend or not, and they would be joined. All right? Okay, so I'm going to do a join. You're going to select, you did a select last week. You're going to do another selection, and you're going to create a new column in here, which is part of this calculation and assignment. I don't know if you did this on the last one or not, but basically you're going to compute a new column that represents here the households in 1990 times the household change to give you some index of the change. And then you're going to make a map of that. All right. And then you're going to do some more table manipulation with the soils data set. So you have one example of doing it as using socioeconomic data, and one example of using it using more environmental data. All right, so I'll let you work on that lab. I don't see GHY here today. Did she show up for a little while? All right. I'm just going to go down there and see if she's there, and then I'll come back. Let's see here. Okay.